Welcome to the CEC Report. It's August 19th and I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined today for a special edition of the CEC Report by Craig Isherwood, CEC Leader. Hello Craig.
Hi Robbie.
And the CEC National Chairman Ann Lawler. Welcome Ann.
Hi Robbie.
So Craig, the boss is here. We'll have to be on our best behaviour today.
Oh, absolutely, always on our best behaviour.
All right. The subject of today's report is survival of the smartest. The only way the world will survive the global economic collapse is if we defeat green fascism and its granddaddy, Charles Darwin. Now, as of this recording today, we woke up as usual to total market mayhem right around the world. A lot of people will be in a state of pure panic as a result of that. This has been we've had a few weeks of this now. Consequently, a lot of people will be thinking, oh, well, maybe Lyndon LaRouche and the CEC were right after all. Well, it's good if they think that, because that's true. The problem is the crisis is much bigger than they can imagine. It's much worse than they imagine. I'll just get a plug in here for the LaRouche Pack TV weekly report that has up there as of today as well, which I urge everyone to watch to see what Lyndon LaRouche has to say. He's never been more sober or serious about this crisis. But it just underscores that the world is in a dire crisis. And we have just put out our latest New Citizen publication with this headline, "Behind the Global Financial Crisis, Charles Darwin was a fraud." And in this paper, we are nailing the greenies as responsible for this crisis. Now that's a bit of a shock for some people. Blaming greenies for the economic crisis is a big call. And you don't automatically think of greenies when you think of derivatives traders and people like that. So what we're going to do is discuss this New Citizen and what we're trying to do here with this expose, so that to make it more understandable for people, because only by understanding this can we actually have a pathway to understand how to think our way through this crisis and survive. So I want to bring in Craig and Ann here now for this discussion. Let's talk first about what we're blaming the greenies for. Why do we make the charge that they are responsible for the crisis? I'll start with you, Craig, and then Ann chip in.
Well, I think the paper really gives people a good sense of what we're talking about, but I want to specifically refer to the back of the paper first, because in the back of the paper we have a chart relating to the 5 big extinction events that have taken place on the face of this planet. Now, what these extinction events are is that the solar system, our Milky Way, goes through a 62 million year cycle, which has to do with its position within our solar system within the actual Milky Way. And over a period of 62 million years, we come up out of the plane of the Milky Way and we go into what's called the northern area, whereby we are struck, the Earth is struck, the solar system is struck by a lot more cosmic radiation. Now, why this is relevant is that over the history of the Earth, 98% of all living species have been wiped out. Now, mankind has never been in this sort of situation before. We've never faced this sort of actual extinction threat.
We've never gone through this phase of the solar system's orbit.
Never, right? Now, the unique thing about human beings is that we are not animals. But this is the charge made by Charles Darwin. This is the fraud that Ann will speak more of in a minute. Now, the point is that human beings, we're fundamentally different in that we have creative reason. We can actually make discoveries of the physical principles that make the universe function, which makes us completely different than animals. We're not animals, we're a different species. Unfortunately, if that is squashed or destroyed, then we become vulnerable and we will become extinct as a species. And this is a charge that Mr. LaRouche has made. There's much material on the LaRouche Pack website about this. And so therefore, this is a very serious aspect of why we put this paper out.
Are you're saying that it's not inevitable for us as a species to go extinct?
No, it's not. But if we ignore this unique quality of creative reason that we have, this ability to make these discoveries, and we don't then develop an economy based upon supporting that actual human quality, then what we have is in effect, an extinction cycle already beginning within an economy. And what you see with the monetary system that we have today, with the derivative traders and so forth, is that we have a system based upon an extinction cycle. When you have when you allow monetarism, the value of money, or these huge amounts of derivatives, these artificial gambling debts, to dictate how the monetary system works, then what you're doing is you're ripping away from the physical economy. True human economics involves the application of scientific and technological progress from the discoveries that we make of how the physical principles of the universe work into the economy. So therefore you have to have an economy that is structured on the development of the real physical needs of the population. That means high quality infrastructure, high quality education, high quality healthcare, all these sorts of things. And you can't allow a parasitical system to exist whereby that real wealth is looted through financial speculation. So when you look at Charles Darwin, right, and this promotion that human beings are nothing more than mere animals, and a financial system that's based upon looting the physical economy, taking down and not investing those aspects of the moves to support the development of human creativity and therefore the scientific and technological progress, then you can easily say that the financial derivatives traders are, in fact, a result of the whole concept of what Darwin stands for.
And the bottom line with this crisis, and maybe Ann, you can comment on this as someone with a background in small business and industry. The bottom line with this crisis is it's not actually a financial crisis. The financial system is just catching up to the breakdown of the physical economy. Now you get to go out in the street a lot and see this. Do you want to make some comments about that?
Well, the true thing is it's the physical economy that actually gives any form of value to any of the monetary system. Like, you know, if all the money in the world is not going to be any use to you if you haven't got a physical economy in which you can actually, you know, live and survive, provide the food, the necessary things that people require. And what Craig's just gone through is, you know, with Charles Darwin, I mean, it was the law of the jungle. It was survival of the fittest. And that's exactly what we have with the market economy today. And the way the market economy is surviving is by killing the physical economy, which is what environmentalism helps to do. And if we're going to have any form of a recovery, then we've got to get, you know, you can't save the money. There's no use saving the money if we haven't got a productive economy. And
yeah, well, you see it in the carbon tax. It's targeting the very things that sustain our existence. You know, principally electricity production. But the Greenies have been doing this for decades in Australia. And when you pull the rug out from under the things that provide our potential to exist, which is what they've done. They've shut down any ability for us to expand hydroelectric dams or expand more power plants, etc. And we've been running on insufficient capacity for a long time. Is it any wonder that the financial system is collapsing, you know, decades later?
Well, what we talk about a lot in this organisation, Mr. LaRouche pioneered, is this concept of energy flux density. Right, what does that mean? It's the amount of energy in any particular amount of space, right, per square metre or whatever. And what you have today under this greeny nutcase scenario is wind power and solar power, which have the lowest energy flux density possible. There is no way of developing high energy flux densities from these types of diffuse power. However, mankind, over the time that man has been on Earth, has been able to make discoveries like, first of all, how to create fire, you know, how to use fire, how to burn certain types of other fuels like coal and so forth, and up into the oil-based economies and then into the nuclear fusion economies.
But didn't that fire start putting carbon into the atmosphere?
Well, see, there's the fraud. It's another greedy fraud. Whenever you talk about the whole environmentalist or economic aspect, it's actually the same thing. The global free trade British system of monetarism that we're suffering today is also just the flip side of the radical environmentalist movement. That's why we have, you know, Queen Elizabeth on the front page with Adolf Hitler, right? And people don't think of Adolf Hitler being a greenie, but in fact he was.
Emphatically so.
Emphatically so, right? So the point with energy flux density is that we have been able to make the discoveries to take us into the realm of nuclear fusion. And we've just had a conference, which will be up on our website, that goes through the discoveries of Marie Curie, for example, of how she discovered radioactivity with Becquerel and others. Right? So we have this unique ability to make these discoveries, right? But under the greedy phenomenon, this is stopped, right? We aren't allowed to make discoveries. We aren't fostering the development of science and technology to go to the next level.
That side of us is demonised.
Yes. So we're not moving into things like fusion energy or matter-antimatter reactions, where we have to be, in order to deal with what I mentioned before, this extinction threat. We as a human species don't have to be confined to the surface of the Earth.
But also, I'm sorry, Craig,
Right.
I'm just going to say, in terms of how the real universe functions and the evolution or true evolution of species, each species that comes into existence, you know, as superior to another, is of a higher mechanism of organisation, just the same as, you know, your increase of energy flux density in the type of powers that mankind uses. Then that's exactly what the universe drives with extinctions and new species coming into existence. And when you look at the human species, we're the last in the line. We're the most organised. We, you know, when you think of, you know, we come out of the mammals, but mammals replaced the cold-blooded reptiles. So we're
Marsupials.
Sorry?
Well, marsupials still around, but you know, the mammals are the higher form.
Higher form, that's right. And so, you know, we eat plant life, we eat animal life, we cook our food, we change the way things actually structure because, you know, the universe has created us as the last species in the line, and we actually have an obligation, right, to the universe to actually live up to the expectations of it, or we will
live according to our nature.
Well,
Our creative nature.
Our creative nature, that's right.
That creative nature is the nature of the universe. The universe is creative, and that creativity is also seen in other living things.
Well, we're getting into where I wanted to go with this conversation, so let me just throw this in there, because this raises Darwin himself. We're at the, you know, what is it about Darwin's work that makes us blame him as the granddaddy of this green movement? Didn't he address this point about our nature exactly?
Well, what Darwin, the whole Darwin project, right, and this is something that, you know, he was a project. He was promoted to change the way that mankind thought about mankind. And the intention was to deny us that creativity, to deny the fact that we, as human beings, could understand that we willfully could use our creativity to change our circumstances. He was aiming to put us into the same paddock as animals. All right, we might have been a little bit more sophisticated than some animals, but we were subjected to the same law of the jungle, survival of the fittest as other animals.
Didn't Darwin and Huxley, his sponsor, his bulldog, they said that our minds in function were no different than other species of animals such as apes. That was their core message.
And that's a reflection, Robbie, of what Mr. LaRouche talks about all the time, of this concept of the oligarchical principle. And it's no accident that Huxley was a Privy Councillor, right? That Darwin was soaked up by the X Club, which was an operation out of the Cambridge Apostles and so forth, which are all linked back into the mechanisms of the British Empire because of exactly the point of destroying the creativity that Anne just mentioned. That's the issue here: is destroy human creativity.
So the people in the 19th century who got fed this idea first by Darwin and Huxley and the X Club that we go through in the paper, they should have seen that the people giving them this message had a vested interest, i.e. they were the same representatives of the same oligarchy that had been treating humanity like beasts for millennia, and now had pulled this rabbit out of a hat to say, oh, we've discovered you are beasts, and it justifies what we do. When you get into this part of the story, though, where you see that Darwin, as you referred to, was a project, and he had powerful backers. One of the points that you emphasised in your speech, Anne, and I should say for those who haven't read the paper yet, this paper is based on a speech that Anne gave to our CEC National Conference called The Humbuggery of Charles Darwin. But you emphasise the point that it is significant that Darwin's publication and promotion coincided with the American Civil War and its immediate aftermath. So why is that significant?
Well, prior to the actual establishment of the United States, the empire and the empire's or oligarchical ideas actually dominated and controlled the way civilizations functioned. The uniqueness of the American system and the establishment of the United States was that it was based on a Christian principle of creativity of the human being. And by developing that creativity through, you would actually nurture scientific discovery, you know, technological advancement. You would be able to improve the conditions of life of your citizenry. You would actually improve or increase the ability to support more people at higher standards of living. So all of those ideas flew right in the face of what this oligarchical system was about, the British Empire. So through people like Lord Shelburne, who was the Prime Minister of England for only a short period of time, but he launched a, he commissioned people like Adam Smith, Jeremy Bentham, Edward Gibbon, and Thomas Malthus, this, oh so Reverend Thomas Malthus, to write diatribes to overturn the ideas of what that American system was based on. And Darwin was actually the real way to pull all of those ideas together and promote it, to overturn those whole...
What was it about America at the time that they were reacting to in the Civil War?
Well, it was production. That was the basis. It's through, if you drive production and industrialisation, and America was building railroads. Railroads were an absolute threat to the control of the British Empire, who dominated trade by sea. So those sorts of things were a threat to their domination and their power. And so by running this project, they were attacking production. They were attacking human creativity as the means to...
There was also an infectious enthusiasm that came from the implementation, you might say, of this principle of creativity. You had the explosion of railroads, as you said. That happened not just in the US, but in Russia. It was picked up all over the place, Germany. So you had this explosion, which that's what they really freaked out about, because this was human beings being creative human beings. This was optimistic. We don't see this today. I mean, we've got such a negative, imploding culture. We don't see the enthusiasm that comes from real creativity.
And you also had an explosion in the population, especially in the United States, but around the world, as a result of this advance in science and technology. And in terms of it being infectious, even Australia benefited from that. If you look at the story of, just to use one example, the people who founded Mildura as a city, the Chaffee brothers, right? They came out of this American tradition of expanded production, building infrastructure, in the form of irrigation works, etc.
Well, our Murray-Darling Basin scheme.
And they gave birth to what became our Murray-Darling Basin scheme. I mean, all entirely inspired by this period in the United States, and the population increased. So, of course, that brings us to, we should concentrate on the actual nature of the Darwin science, I think, because you can, just to establish why we call it a fraud. But that increase in population, it was like the worst possible nightmare for dear old Thomas Malthus. Now, so in terms of Malthus himself, Darwin said that it was Malthus who gave him the idea for natural selection. Perhaps you can say a few things about Malthus, but one thing I wanted to just get you to comment on, Bob Brown, our dear Bob Brown, Saint Bob, last year when Dick Smith had his population puzzle documentary on the ABC, and Bob was part of the panel. And of course Bob has the persona of someone who's a Zen Buddhist or something, very calm person, etc. Bob Brown chimed in a few times to make the point, Malthus was right. But isn't the bottom line that Malthus's arithmetic was not right?
Exactly. Because what Malthus is espousing that the population is growing geometrically, 2, 4, 8, 16, whatever, and that sustenance, the ability to support, will only grow arithmetically as 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you look at human history, that it works exactly the opposite. And the reason it works the opposite is because of human creativity. We're not animals. We're not in a paddock and we just eat it down and we don't, haven't the ability to change those circumstances. So, and of course, the American system really emphasised that ability for human creativity to increase the ability to support population. And they freaked out.
Well, I think that's very evident when you come back to the Murray-Darling Basin and just look at the rice growers that we used to have in the Murray-Darling Basin. At one point, a few hundred families of family farmers were producing enough food to produce food for 40 million people for a whole year. And that's in the climate of privatisation, deregulation, shut down of family farmers in the last 20 to 30 years. So that is the proof that if you allow human creativity, particularly through the enterprise and of family farming operations, to really flourish, that if you support that, as was done in the American system, you have an explosion of productive capacity, as shown through our rice farmers and so forth. That's not what the oligarchy wants. They want to reduce the population, but they want dumb people. They want people to act like animals. And when you read these quotes from Darwin, the idea of he supported infanticide, right? He supported eugenics, the idea that there's certain classes of people. Look, most people don't read Charles Darwin. No. And you and I both had the displeasure of having to read some of his crap. And that's what it is. I mean, the guy is a project, as you mentioned.
And isn't this why we have to use terms like genocide? There's no getting around that what we're dealing with today is genocide, because when you look at Darwin, you look at Malthus, the people who cooked up this whole green agenda, their intention was nothing but.
Yeah.
And look at the famine right now in Africa, right? That is what happens when you destroy the physical economy of countries. That's an absolute holocaust, which will come to our country and to the face of the planet as a whole, because the governing idea is that we've got to get rid of people.
And but the point with Malthus is it was willful. Malthus willfully advocated that we should do the things that stop our ability to sustain ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a willful policy globally today under the British system.
Should be a policy and an intention to control population. To them, population was one of the biggest threats, and Darwin was the basis of establishing this eugenics movement. I mean, Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, who was knighted by Edward VIII for founding the eugenics movement. I mean, they were advocating this race science. That's what they were all about, reducing the population. Most of Darwin's family were part of the eugenics movement.
And this is going to be a sore point for Darwinists today, who go out of their way to try and whitewash this aspect of Darwinism, to claim that there's no evidence of Darwin being associated with eugenics, but obviously the opposite is true.
Well, just read his works, read what he says himself, and that's the dead giveaway. And his praise for people like Francis Galton and W.R. Grieg and these people that he, in his second book, The Descent of Man, I mean, he's all out for eugenics at that particular time. So, and then you got people like Thomas Huxley, who was his bulldog. Huxley, his grandson, Julian Huxley, who was the president of the Eugenics Society when Hitler was defeated, I mean, he was part of establishing the Worldwide Fund for Nature with Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard. So, because eugenics was no longer popular, they changed the name to environmentalism, and that's why we always draw that, you've got to look back to the origins and what the mindset and the ideology is that actually governs the establishment of these movements.
Well, look, in the time we've got left, let's just talk about the fraud that's right at the centre of Darwin's method, just as a way of contrasting with give the audience a bit of an appreciation of what you touched on at the beginning, Craig, about what real evolution actually was. Most people, when you go to school and you learn about Darwin, you're either that small percentage of the population that's a fundamentalist creationist and believe, oh no, of course Darwin was wrong because God created the world in 6 days, and they just reject the whole thing outright without thinking it through. That, of course, is not why Darwin was wrong, but the bottom line was Darwin's evolution, Darwin's natural selection, can't actually explain evolution, how things evolved. It reduces it all. His natural selection reduces it all to statistical probability. It lays out the odds for things evolving in a certain way, like you'd have at a horse racing track. And of course, there's nothing that makes sense about that. And the whole thing is that statistical probability is in fact a cover-up for the fact it can't explain evolution. So what does real evolution actually look like? That people need to sort of, the principles that we see in the biosphere, that we know how things evolved in a certain way, that one, contradict Darwin, but also prove the point we're making about human nature.
Well, I think you have to, this is the fundamental problem with statistics, right? It ignores what the real processes are within the biosphere. And the fact is that we have a principle of life that governs the way the biosphere works, life which is creative in actual fact. So therefore you have a principle, a physical principle of life which governs all the processes that we have, living processes that we have on the earth. So when you have these mass extinction events like we haven't wiped out the principle of life. It's still there, but what happens is under the principle of life, living processes take a higher, they return under the principle of life to a higher state, as we've indicated. That's the proof of things, from reptiles up to mammals, with the growth of green trees and green plants and so forth. This is what's governing the life, the process, or physical principle of life is what's governing the process.
So the fact you have this process of change to higher states straight away tells you this is not random.
No, it's not statistical. The statistical process is a reduction to try and curve fit a political scenario, right? Population reduction. That's what this whole thing is about. And the whole financial monetary system is based upon a statistical approach, whereas you do have physical principles of economy, and those physical principles are based around the application of human creativity into the economy. If we do that, as seen in the American system, we have a massive transformation potential to support many more millions of people. So the principle of life overall governs the processes that take place in the biosphere. Now, the fact is that we are going to move into the potential for a new extinction process. Are we going to survive as a species, a human species, or are we going to get wiped out because we haven't developed the necessary understanding of the physical principles that exist right now in areas like nuclear fusion, antimatter reactions? Are we going to get wiped out because we don't have the ability to deal with the sorts of forces that are going to come as we move into a new extinction cycle, into this new period? Well, see, that's the difference between us as human beings and just being mere animals. And I mean, these are the sorts of processes that we can actually master as human beings.
Craig, oh sorry, you
No, I was just thinking about, when you just asked that question, I was thinking along the lines of how Darwin's evolution was not actually, for his evolution to work, everything branched out basically from one original species, and then it transmutated and somehow, random selection chose some species to survive. Yeah. But when you look at the actual fossil records and the way, the determination of things, for instance, when birds came into existence, what you had was a parallel evolution that was taking place right across all species at that particular time, whether they were on the same continent or another continent. So there was an upshift, like as if the whole universe was driving an upshift in the way species functioned right across everything, until eventually there was, birds came into existence. And the same thing is when you look at, the evolving of human species as well. There were several attempts like that were taking place before finally you get what we know as modern man.
So you get you get a picture when you look at this that the evolution that takes place is an evolution of the biosphere as a whole, in which everything inside the biosphere manifests that
it's all
change that's taking place.
There's no one part of the biosphere that's not interconnected with everything else. It's one living manifold, you might say, governed by this physical process of life. So this is a completely different way than Darwin, because Darwin was a fraud. I mean, the guy was simply pushing a political line based upon population reduction.
Well, look, we're running out of time, but let's just get a little bit concrete, quite briefly. Because we are having this discussion at a time when the world is literally on edge on this global economic collapse, a breakdown collapse, as LaRouche calls it, how does this help us think about the solutions that need to be put in place? I mean, LaRouche made the point a few weeks ago that Glass-Steagall, which is the bankruptcy reorganisation of the system, isn't the solution. It's just that first step that provides the framework. What is the solution that we can apply from our creativity?
Well, the only way we're going to get out of it is to increase production. Everything that the American system of the founding fathers, that these, you know, the British East India Company and the Privy Council railed against with the Darwin Project, is what we need to revive. We have to have, you know, through human creativity, we have to get the physical production of our economies right around the world producing, because that's the only thing that gives value to anything.
Yeah, it's a commitment to the nature of who human beings are, the quality of what makes us unique as human beings. Having that commitment, then you foster through whatever branch of science or, you know, economy. This is what we have to do to foster that. So the commitment comes first and foremost to the idea of the value of human life, you know, the sanctity of human life, of what actually human beings are. That comes first. Once that becomes adopted, as did become adopted in the American system through the idea of a true republic, the idea of a commonwealth, going back into the original ideas of Nicholas of Cusa. Once that becomes the intention, then all the other policies will flow. Glass-Steagall is a result of that policy. The NWAPA program that we have in the US, but also the Australian water development projects we have here, are a result of increasing the production, the means of supplying more and more goods and services to Australian people or people around the world in order to increase their standard of living, take them out of the sort of poverty that comes from wrecking the economy from these speculative type operations that we have destroying us now.
We can't let the Greens stop us doing that on behalf of the oligarchy that doesn't want us to do that.
Well, one of the things the Greens and the Darwin try to withhold from everybody is causality, right? It's all just, you know, we're purely in the realm of sense certainty, no causality to anything. And as Craig just mentioned, intention is an absolutely crucial thing for people to understand. Intention to destroy or intention to build.
If you support green policies and you think you're supporting humankind, you're actually destroying the next generation of your own kids. That's the hard reality, and most people are so brainwashed about this reality today because of the operations of the British Empire, specifically over the last 40 years, that unless we come to that realisation, unless people realise that they're being so brainwashed, there is not going to be a future for mankind. And Mr. LaRouche made that abundantly clear in terms of how that process would work out, in the sense that, you know, we'll develop in or descend into a new dark age.
All right, well, thanks for that. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Ann. We've gone a little bit over time. Let me just reiterate. Here's the paper. You can download a PDF version of our website, order it in bulk copies to get around. This is the best weapon you can possibly have to launch a counterattack against this green fascism, which is absolutely necessary if we're going to survive. I also urge you look at Ann's speech, full speech from the conference, because this is an abridged version, which is up on our website. Also up on our website is Craig Isherwood's introductory speech at the conference, which is complementary to Ann's speech. They're both essential viewing. And otherwise, this is the most serious time in any of our lives, what's happening now with this global crisis. If you want to survive, if you want humanity to survive, you have to master these concepts. I can't reiterate that enough. And like I said, watch Lyndon LaRouche today on the LaRouche Pack weekly report, and you'll see his tone of that. This is a man who's got more expertise in this than anyone alive, and he is alarmed at how things are. So we have to master these concepts, and we have to fight like we've never fought before. So on that note, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on the CEC Report.